Rabbi, good afternoon. So good to see you.
Hi, Isaac. How you doing?
Great. Well, my biggest takeaway was from yesterday was blessed be the name of God and everything. We've probably discussed this multiple times, but but from yesterday it reinforced this idea or this concept of blessing God's name at all times. So thank you.
There you go, 100%. So today, after swearing, going through things, we're going to go to retaliation. What's really interesting is that it seems that we're going almost like in and out of 10 commandments, right? We have murder and adultery, which are definitely 10 commandments. Divorce, not so much. Swearing, yes. Retaliation, no. I don't really have a really strong idea after the Beatitudes being like the replacement 10 commandments. What is the deal with this order? A lot of times commentators really just note that it's internally ordered. So for example, when we look at swearing, we said heaven and was it either heaven by the throne of God or earth by the footstool. Jerusalem definitely paralleled the chapter 66 from Isaiah. But even once we get to this one by swearing, it's really hard to understand the internal structure, and I'm not sure we'll get to the bottom of it. That being said, as crazy as it sounds, I think we'll try to do all of the section on retaliation, which is 538 to 42 today.
Well,
So
that'll be your first. Well, we can shoot. Well, we can aim for that. Okay, so here we go. The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 38 onwards. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him also have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you.
right, so we have cheek slapping, we have cloak taking, we have mile walking, and we have beggars. So we have four analogies or parables or examples that Jesus gives on the Sermon on the Mount of how we should not retaliate. So we'll do our best to try to differentiate them, but it's not so easy.
So, as you noticed, right, these four things are they to be taken at face value, or are you saying that these are these are analogies and they're meant to mean something else? And a part of this feels like to be taken at face value. Part of this feels like it's a deeper thing. But so, could you clarify which, if where they fall on this spectrum?
Like usual, I definitely cannot clarify. What I can say is that our last section, 533 to 537, there was generally a consensus among early church fathers and commentators in general that this section is not meant totally literally. And if anything, when we see the section on divorce, 531 to 532, we see very concretely about how the Christian community really doesn't know how to take the Sermon on the Mount or Christianity in general. And I think there's a question that we could level at you, Isaac. When you see a verse in the New Testament, wherever it might be, do you feel bound by that verse in a prescriptive, legislative way? Or do you feel that this might be wise advice? Or you might think that this is just a general ideology, a theology that's getting imparted to you, and this is the means that's getting chosen to be imparted to you?
Wow, that's a very profound question. I think that probably summarizes that captures the essence of the Sermon on the Mount, right? So many of the Sermon on the Mount consist of both things which could be taken at a literal value, at a literal face value, but we also know all of them are beyond human reach. So then, are they meant to be something as in something to hope for, or do they mean something as a vehicle to something deeper? I don't know. I think I would I want to say that each verse should be taken independently, because we all use language in multiple ways. There are certain times when we say things literally. There are certain times when we use things as we use analogy to express ourselves. So I probably would look at that through the lens through that as conversational lens. Some of which are literal, some are meant to be taken as more allegorical, and some are means to get towards a deeper truth.
Yeah, and so what you're saying also is this and that, maybe, I don't know, it depends. And I think it's really interesting. That's how the Christian community generally has dealt with this. The most famous example, I think, to put aside the New Testament, the question is how binding is the Old Testament? Because what you'll see in the evangelical community is, let's say, like, no to homosexuality. But the verse right next to that, we have also no to crab, no to tattoos. And what we see is that a lot of times the mores of the society, or the ethics or the morals or the cultural background, the cultural baggage of the society, is what defines how Christianity sees the actual prescriptive legislative laws of Moses. So while they'll say, oh, you can't have homosexual relations in the, at least the evangelical community, they won't have as strong an anathema attitude towards crab or towards pig or towards tattoos. So a lot of times I think a lot of the laws are self-reflective of the values of which you kind of see yourself in the mirror. I happen to be anti-gay, and therefore I'm anti-homosexuality. Or if you're in the left side of the United Methodist Church, as we've discussed, and you find a negative attitude towards homosexuality, anathema to your understanding of Jesus and Christianity, you kind of will say, well, that verse from the Old Testament is exactly that, the Old Testament. It's meant to teach you something else, but it's not meant to teach you about how to actually live your life. And I think this is what we're seeing over here. A lot of the cases in the Sermon on the Mount are really easy to deal with, though, because it says, the verse says this, but I'm saying do more. The verse says don't swear. I'm saying even don't swear, don't do more. The verse says don't get angry, don't murder, even don't get angry. The verse says don't divorce your wife for no reason, etc. This is one of the first ones, though, when we look at on retaliation, where verse 38, it says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. Very famously, this is one of the most famous verses in the Bible, separate from the New Testament. The Latin, lex talionis is very famous, that you're not allowed to take revenge. The idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and if you learn the rest of the verse, at least as it shows up in the Bible 3 times, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot.
See, in a sense, right, this goes against commandment of Moses, right? Because again, Moses did set up rules and laws in place where somebody does something, that he or she also
this is the commandment that Moses set up, though. This verse, an eye for an eye, shows up in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. So it's not meant to be contradictory. It's meant to work in hand in hand.
In a sense, right, this forms the basis of any legal system. People get punished, they do something. My point is, like, we use legal system as a means to get towards some form of justice now.
Right. This idea of reciprocal justice, or to try to give people what they did to you, hand for hand, foot for foot, is definitely rejected by the Talmudic rabbis. This is very, very famous, that the rabbis do have examples. For example, what we call an eid zomem, a lying witness, that you do give him what he tried to do to someone else. If he tried to do something, you do it to him. But generally, the rabbis understood that there's 5 penalties for, if you, like, let's say you cut off someone's ear. So you don't get your ear cut off. You pay for the ear, you pay for the pain, you pay for the feeling, you pay for the embarrassment, you pay for the suffering, but you don't get your ear cut off. So generally, the rabbis, generally this is viewed as one of the more liberal attitudes of Talmudic rabbis, that they took this as not literal, where this verse very famously shows up in the Code of Hammurabi in the 17th and 16th century BCE, and most definitely when it says a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, hand, foot for foot, burn for a burn, wound for a wound, stripe for a stripe, all those in Hammurabi's code is definitely meant to be literally. So we could be sure, though, in Jesus's time in the 1st century, there would have been a Sadducean sect and others who would have taken it literally, but the groups probably where Jesus was floating around would have already understood this as monetary compensation, and they wouldn't have looked at this as a literal. So if we take that as our starting point, that Jesus understands that this is not meant to be a literal interpretation of monetary compensation, it definitely helps us understand the next verse. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. What's interesting is if someone strikes you, it doesn't parallel an eye, because your eye isn't popped out. It doesn't parallel tooth. Your tooth isn't popped out. It doesn't parallel hand. It doesn't parallel foot. The idea that Jesus is doing, he's already recognizing that this is symbolic. That because otherwise you can't understand this idea of cheek for cheek, because a cheek doesn't leave a permanent mark on you.
Well, it could, right? If somebody gave them a slap, a very harsh slap, and if that hurt your tooth, I mean, it could. But so help me understand.
It's generally understood. You're not wrong, but it's generally understood. An eye for an eye, tooth for tooth means like your tooth was knocked out, your eye was knocked out, your hand was cut off.
Yeah. So help me understand this. So are you saying that at the first level, that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that those that even though Moses meant them literally, the Talmudic rabbis did not take this literally. It was kind of meant allegorical. Is that what you're saying?
It's so 100% the Talmudic rabbis, for various reasons, understood this to be about this is the way to teach monetary compensation for for those things. What's interesting, though, is the more extreme version for Jesus is a more lenient case. Because if it's bad to hit someone, then it's bad to speak harshly to them. If it's bad to cut off someone's hand, it's bad to even hit someone. So Jesus' perspective, his super arrogative level will be a slap. But I think we have to understand the historical context of a slap in the first century. If I slapped you today, Russ goes in the street and slaps Isaac. Isaac would be annoyed, offended. He may not want to be friends, but there wouldn't probably be any legislation. You could sue me and it wouldn't be much. But we see in the Talmud, specifically in Tractate Baba Kama, that is the idea that if you hit someone on the cheek, you actually have to pay 200 azuz, 200 like dollars. And if you hit them with the backside, it might be 400. If you publicly embarrass them, it's more. The idea of hitting someone on the cheek was viewed very clearly in that time period, not as a militancy, but as a way to embarrass someone. So over here, what's really interesting, I really think that fits in with the idea of like kind of Jesus' ministry, that if you think that someone's trying to embarrass you, then you could even take more embarrassment, because that's okay.
But that's not okay, right? So I feel like there's something deeper in this, because self-esteem is important, as in we all have a sense of who we are. And if somebody would insult
Matthew calls him an evildoer. Matthew's not trying to justify his perspective. Matthew is never trying to justify or even address the other perspective. We never hear about the woman's side in the divorce. We never hear about the person who you're swearing with. We never hear about the person who you're angry with. Over here, the person who hits you first is an evildoer. We've passed judgment upon him, and now we moved on. So I don't think it's very important to kind of focus. He's evil. We're not denying that. You're going to deal with evil people. That's life.
That's a profound statement, right? I mean, he labels people as evil, and thanks for mentioning this. I had not noticed this earlier. He says, "Do not rest as the one who's evil." Wow, and that's like he labels people as evil, and evil is not as in something in the abstract, but he's referring to evil within as in being embodied by a person.
And in different translations, we have it sometimes. It'll say, "Do not resist evil," and sometimes it will not resist he who is evil. So I'm not sure if it's talking about an evildoer. The one thing we can be sure, and just like the last case, anything more in verse 537, anything more than this comes from the evil one. I think we just generally see there's like this kind of black and white situation sometimes where there's an evil perspective that we're aware of. If you swear unnecessarily, you're just on the wrong side of history. You're in the yin when you should be on the yang. And also over here, if you're slapping someone, whenever, he's the evildoer. So, but what's interesting, if he strikes you, turn the other and let him strike you again. So again, I definitely agree that this is not the best way to build a strong ego. I think your observation that this could be absolutely destructive to a person's self-worth is absolutely accurate, but I don't think Jesus cares. I think Jesus doesn't view himself or the Sermon on the Mount as a way to build self-worth. I think a lot of times self-worth is defined as how much they accept John's kingdom of heaven and see it through those goggles. So we don't see this idea of making yourself a better person, I think, overall. This idea that Jesus is kind of saying you're either team Jesus or you're not. It's very rare that we see a person kind of go through a process. And if anything, we saw that with some of the disciples when he called them from the lake when they're fishing. There was not a process of going from point A to point Z. There was just flip. You're A, you're a Z. You're not my follower. You're in the Sea of Galilee, and now you are my follower. So I think that idea of building self-worth, while is important psychologically and is important from a mental health perspective, is not really advocated so strongly throughout. And I'll even throw the question at you. The passion. Was Jesus acting in a way that you would think is appropriate for someone with strong mental health? And the answer is always no. There's an ulterior agenda, the ulterior motive that you would not be able to suffer that pain, and you would try to opt out. But a lot of times there's this black and white. Like for Jesus, there's no opting out. This is where you are. So I think your observation is correct, but I don't think it's something that Jesus addresses.
Yeah, then that's wow. Wow, that's a profound statement. I need to kind of think that through a bit. So
Okay, so on that point though, I just want to point out something because this is one of my favorite. A lot of the differences that we haven't talked about Luke in month or so, but this is actually one of my favorite Luke differences because it's really cute. So I want to show that, just point this out. So in verse 39, it says, "But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other." So by you turning, it's saying that it's if the person wants to continue to be evil, that's his or her decision. It's not on you. You struck here, and you just go like this. I'm ready for another one. But in Luke, it says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. It's saying proactively, saying there's another one for you to get at because you can't destroy my self-worth because it's defined in terms of it's intertwined with Jesus. So I think while this might be a little bit too creative, and may not be exactly in the words, but I think it's accurate. There's a difference between just turning passively and letting the person off do something versus you offering up the other cheek. So there's more to get at.
well, thank you for that. So thinking out loud, right? Do you see a connection between this passage and the one we discussed yesterday? So yesterday's was human beings don't have any control. God is God. Don't swear either by heaven or by the earth or even by your own hair because one cannot make it black. Or by the point being that things, each one is finite and it's beyond your control.
There's a
So
divine plan, right?
divine plan. So if this divine, do you see any connections, or do you see any connections between the previous passage and this passage?
100%. I think this thread runs throughout that if you don't have control, it's just your job to live up to the values. It's not your job, there's a very famous line in the Mishnah. It's not your job to make sure you get the job done. It's your job just to do the job.
So okay, we've established that human beings lack control. From there, would you also go on to say that life is predestined? Now, I don't believe in predestination. I believe
again, like it's interesting the difference between philosophy and theology. I think theologically, Jesus did not know his end. Again, like it's always a question of what level. Like, of course, if he's a Messiah for you, you'll say he's a prophet. But if he's a prophet, he definitely doesn't show a complete awareness throughout the Gospels or the Synoptics about what's going to happen to him. And it could be that was either hidden from him, if you believe he's a prophet, or it could be he's aware and he just had to go through it, depending on your theological perspective. But throughout the Gospel, there's definitely not an awareness that seems that anything is known. So I don't know if you want to say predestined means known or it has to be that case. It's unclear to me, but it doesn't seem like Jesus is living a life that he views as predestined.
So in this context of retaliation, the only agency a person has is in turning the cheek. The agency in that is not as in walking away from it, but just standing up and saying.
If you want to say that's agency, sure.
What do you call it then? So, or the only response in this case is saying he starts saying run away from that or flee from that or respond, but he's saying if somebody slaps you on your left cheek, you also show them the other cheek, which is a form of choice. It's not as monotonous as it, but that's something he wants his disciples to do, as in intentionally offer the next cheek.
Well, if you look at this example while comparing it to the next three examples, there's always a disservice done to a person, either by an evil person or someone to try to extort you. And there's always even if Jesus is saying that even if the person tries to extort you, you should literally go to the next level. He thinks extorting, he can't even extort you because you're going to give it to him, the next situation. And I think we see this a lot in modern literature and movies where there's a robber and then the priest says, oh, he didn't steal from me. And even this is his. We see that in Les Mis, right? Where there's the idea that if you're a holy person, you don't really worry about property. And if anything, a lot of people will look at this specific section of retaliation as a source for a renunciation of property that certain Christians take, especially in the first century and throughout time, a monk class of people. I don't know how I mean, obviously the Calvinists take a different attitude, and I don't know about your attitude towards ownership of property or money or a collection of items, but I think, Jesus is generally viewed as an ascetic in his way in life. And these verses definitely should be viewed and can be viewed as an argument for renunciation of property, because You shouldn't be giving away your coat if that's your coat. You earned your coat. You bought your coat because you need your coat. And it's not like today where we just go to Burlington Coat Factory and have unlimited amount of coats. In that time, it was very uncommon for someone to have more than 2 outfits. So for someone to actually turn your cheek, that's fine. You have a second cheek. But to take your coat and then it says take your cloak as well, that's kind of taking your whole outfit. It's almost saying that it's okay if you're naked because this person wants to extort and steal from you, and you should enable him because your worth and your definition to the world is not based on your ownership of things.
Yeah, now that I think about this and thanks for the explanation, was he trying to use these verses to get at the deeper truth? A deeper truth being you're worth more than any physical belonging or any physical harm you might go through. One might go any physical harm inflicted on a person or any property they own or any physical belongings they own, that they are worth more than that. Was he trying to get to that deeper truth, to that deeper truth through these verses?
It doesn't seem that Jesus is very concerned about proselytizing or converting these people through the Sermon on the Mount. It doesn't seem he's trying to fix the evildoer or fix the person who's suing you or fix the person who forces you to go to a mile. It seems that all these things are just, they are the other that you're supposed to kind of use as a piece, as an impediment in your own life in order for you to be more successful.
What do you mean more successful? Okay, so you use
As Christians, a better Christian. It's interesting. We even have a parallel in Proverbs in 25:21, and I think it on the one hand it's a parallel, on the other hand it's not. Where it says, "If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you." So the first half of the verse, or the first verse, seems to really parallel, saying that your enemy is not really your enemy so much. Your enemy is a person who is mistaken. And if you could support your enemy, maybe you'll make a friend out of him. Maybe you'll just keep him away from you, whatever. But then the second half of the verse, or the second verse says, in doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head and the Lord will reward you. It's a lot of different opinions about what that specifically means. But there seems to be at least a minimal a attitude paralleling this, and that's specifically that we'll see in the next section on love. But we see at least that parallel that if you have an enemy, you could give him more than he or she deserves. Okay, if you look at 41, verse 41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile and go also as a second mile. So usually this is viewed, the word force by most commentators is used as conscripted. That it's more than force. It's that in a situation where an army would force themselves upon you to do something against your will. Namely, it's one thing to go 1 mile if you want to. It's another thing to go 1 mile against your will because you're forced to. And they're saying that even if you're forced to do something against your will, it's even beneficial to go the extra mile when these people force you. What's interesting about the whole idea of going a mile, in rabbinic literature, we always have this idea that you should go an extra mile for a commandment. So if you don't, you should go out of your way to fulfill. And over here we see, I think, another rabbinic parallel that's not really. So the rabbis say, go the extra mile when? In order to fulfill the word of God. If you need, if prayers is 1 mile away, you got to go 1 mile. Well, if it's 50 miles away, then don't go. But Jesus is saying, if something is forcing upon you to go 1 mile, even the wrong direction, you should take it one step farther.
So
show that person.
Yeah, so could you clarify what does force here mean? If anyone forces you to go 1 mile now, is this meant to be taken literally, or was this just trying to get to a point?
Isn't that your first question, Isaac? Is it literal or not?
Yeah, because walking was a common mode of transportation in that day, right? And so if they had to walk a mile, which meant that it's quite a bit of work on your part to walk a mile back in the. I'm assuming it's quite a bit of work to walk a mile.
So the word here that we have, and sometimes it's compel, sometimes it's force. Most people argue that the Greek word, which is angariu, is a Persian loan word. And it's a word that's a technical term that the Roman practice of making other people do labor for you when they go to your country. So, a lot of times when soldiers were in a different country, they'd say, I have to stay, I have to take lodging by you, and you have to feed us. So this idea of the word that is used in the Sermon on the Mount is actually that Persian loan word for requisitioning local goods or labor or property in order to help the efforts. So I think that word is used specifically because saying how anthema the idea of helping these people. It's not that you're going 1 mile in the wrong direction. It's that these people are working against your interest. It's like a double negative. That's not a positive. It's like really, really bad.
So from here, would you go on to say if somebody is, if people work, so we have cheap immigrant labor, and if the labor is being abused, then would this word go on to say, as a worker, go the extra mile, or he thinks he can only make you work for 10 hours a day, work 12 hours a day and show him that is that? I mean,
again, I would say in this situation, none of these, one interpretation, it's about showing the evildoer how to be a good person. That's what you mentioned earlier. I don't read any of these 4 examples about showing the evildoer about how to be a good person, because our starting point is an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, is saying this was the way that you relate to people. It's always a unilateral relation. Like it used to be, he cut off your ear, you cut off his ear. But now is that if he even does something small to you, you go the extra mile to show what kind of Christian you are.
I see. So Tamal, thank you for that. Thank you for that, the clarification. So it sounds like he's saying, be kind, be polite, be friendly with everyone, even if they are mean to you, and even if they are evil, and they're doing intentional evil things against you. Do not do tit for tat.
I think the way you're framing is interesting. I don't view this as kind or polite. I think it's more like a theological prescription. It's saying to be a proper Christian, this is how you live your life. I don't think it's about being kind. I don't think it's trying to invoke or inculcate you with proper character traits. I think it's saying this is how to be a good person, but it's not teaching you that. Like, again, like, in my opinion, it's like the yin and yang. It's either this or that. Okay. The last one, again, I'm happy we got through a whole section, but the last one is also somewhat repetitive, but interesting. Give to everyone who begs from you and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. So on the one hand, there's no extra mile here. It's just saying like, give charity, right? But what's extra about this, I think, again, is when you take it into the rabbinic approach. So there's a holiday called Purim. Purim is a holiday that celebrates Esther's victory against Haman. That takes place around March and the end of February. So in that time, the Jewish custom is saying that you have anyone who asks money from you, you have to give them. But what the implication is, anytime the rest of the year that someone asks you money, you don't have an obligation to always give people money who beg from you. Your obligation is to make sure people don't die, that they're clothed. So if you see someone walking naked in the street, 100% as a human being, you have an obligation to dress them. If you see someone has no food, you have an obligation to feed them. You see someone has no medicine, you have an obligation to give them medicine. But over here, it's interesting. Give to anyone who begs from you. What happens if someone begs for you, but they don't need money? Actually, I just read a case like that. There was like this 100-year-old, I forgot what country it was. He begged 24/7. And when he died, all the money went to some charity. He never needed the money. He just didn't want to waste his time. And he thought by begging money, he was able to support a charity. So what happens if someone like that comes to you? And so from Jesus' perspective, again, I think he's going one level past the rabbis, where the rabbis would say, you don't have an obligation to give money to every person who begs. You have the right to investigate his or her situation. Is that person worthy of your money? You only have $1. Where do you want to give it? Maybe you want to give that $1 and get the most bang for your buck, literally. And you want to make sure that it goes to a specific charity. So it seems Jesus is saying, give to everyone. You don't have the right to discriminate if someone's rich or poor, high or low, pretty or ugly, whatever. You have to just give to everyone. And on top of it, so I think that is in contradistinction to the rabbinic approach. And do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. What's really interesting is that
which kind of, as think about that, verse 20, verse 42, right? It raises serious implications for philanthropy, as in, again, in this context, is about giving. It's about giving to one who begs from you. But the point is, people have a need. If somebody asks you for money, give this to all. And he's saying, don't make any decision based upon, is this person worthy? Are they going to use it? But because he asked you there's a need, you give this to him, right? In philanthropy, we want donors to give, as we all have a need, right? And so, but the way, and we also think the part of good decision making is for the people to decide which place would make the most impact. And give to that, which seems to be a bit, a complete, different organizations can have the same need, but we'll probably give the one which makes the most impact, which sits directly contradictory against this, which says just give to everyone, which, okay.
Again, what's interesting is that it looks like there's no discriminating, like you're saying. But I will note that the last line doesn't seem to follow. If you look at it, give to anyone who begs and do not refuse anyone who borrows. So first of all, that's out of order. It should be like, if anyone wants to borrow something, lend them. And even if they want to, you want to take something forever, keep it. even let that. So this verse does seem like it's backwards. And a proof that this is a little bit backwards is when we look at Luke. And Luke says, give to everyone who begs from you, identically. And if anyone takes away your goods, either through stealing or not returning it from borrowing, do not ask for them again. So I think I think the Lukean example is probably the more authentic. It fits perfectly with our first three examples. But nonetheless, to focus on Matthew, this ending and anyone who borrows from you, give them, it seems to be an extension of the idea of just giving to people and you not seeing property as yours. And this seems to be another proof for this idea of renunciation of personal property throughout the.
So does this last verse have any basis in the Talmudic scriptures, which is give, like don't discriminate between people?
The Talmud actually has this very, I can read it to you if you want me to pull it out, but it has very famously, Maimonides codifies that there's 7 levels of charity. And if you just give charity to someone, that's actually not the best thing you could do for them. If someone begs money from you, the best thing you could do for them is, I'm sure you know the answer, if you teach a man to
fish,
yeah. So the Maimonides codifies that the best thing to do for someone if they need charity is to not give it to them, but find them a job. Number 2, it also says if you're gonna give them charity, not give it to them, but give anonymously. When you give to someone and it's not anonymous, then they feel that they owe you and you feel like a good person. Both those things are bad. So Maimonides, and on top of that, he also has another thing where you lend them. Judaism is an interest-free loan religion. So you lend them money, try and get back on their feet. So there's many things you could do besides begging. Begging is, if someone begs, you just give them charity, it's viewed as a Band-Aid in Judaism. It's not viewed as a way that's truly helping the person. Help someone is make sure they get off their butt and get a job.
So weren't beggars common, like back in the day, right? There were also Jewish beggars, people who were Jews who were still beggars. So
100%.
how do you something to think about? Okay.
No, you're right. There's always beggars, but there's different ways you relate to beggars. It's very common that you see a beggar could have their lot completely changed. I read a story the other day about a person who was a drug addict, and the cop kind of took the drug addict under her wing, and the person now saw that person 10 years later is married, has a job, has a good life. The best way to help a beggar or someone in need of funds is to kind of readjust their life. Okay, Isaac, I think we have to.
Yep. Yeah, Rabbi, on that note, thank you. It's as always. Thanks for your time and discussion. Lots to think about. Have a great day. Thank you.
Lots to think about.